Happy Friday. Thanks for joining me tonight for a craft night with friends. We are working on some foundation paper piecing tonight, and I'm hoping we can actually get this block done. So that is the plan. My name is Alyssa Thomas from Penguin and Fish, where we make cute embroidery kits for beginners, and I'm here every weeknight at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. And it's a time that we can relax and craft together. So we're working through that Splendid Sampler 2 book, working on the Get to the Point block. It looks like a sewing needle, and is using foundation paper piecing, which means we sew it onto a piece of paper. That's our foundation. And the design is printed right on the paper, and we are just following the lines. It has there's a process to it, but once you get it, it becomes really, really kind of relaxing. So we're going to kind of dig into like the relaxing part of it tonight, I think. All right, let's go. Hello, everyone. Thanks for popping in this Friday. So here we are. This is where we left off last night. We have, well, first of all, this is what we're going for. That's the Get to the Point block. And we have trimmed out our pattern, and I've colored with colored pencil the different fabrics just so I can clearly see what fabric goes where. That is so helpful. I definitely recommend getting the crayons out or whatever and coloring beforehand. We are starting with the A piece, so there's two sections. We have the A section and the B section. Again, we can tell because of the A's in front of all these numbers and the B's in front of all these numbers. So A section, B section. We'll get to the B tonight too. And then after the letters are numbers, and that is the order that we sew things in. So we've done A1, A2, A3, and A4, and that's where we've left off. So A5 is our next piece that we're going to work on. So here we go. Here's our 4 pieces sewn onto here so far. So let's just continue with the process here. That's where we left off. So we are on the A5 piece of the section A. So all right, first thing I'm going to do is get my little rotary cutter out. I am going to trim the seam allowance here for A5, and the lines we are concerned with, again, are the piece that we're working on and whatever came before. So, we got A5, this is A7 and A6. Those are lines that are touching A5, but those are after. So, 6 and 7 are after 5. So I'm not going to concern myself with these lines at all. The line that I am going to concern myself with is the one between our current piece and everything that happened before. So A1, A2, that's touching this line that happened before. So that's an indicator that this is the line that we're dealing with. So that's the line. What I'm going to do is take my postcard and cover up everything that happened before and expose the current piece, but I'm going to put my postcard right on that line. And again, ignoring everything that comes later, like A7, we're pretending that doesn't even exist. All right, so I'm on that line. Now I'm going to fold the paper against the postcard. So you can use like a file folder or anything that has like a nice solid edge, but that's super thin. I think a postcard works super duper great. Oh, you've been missing working on the Splendid Sampler too. I know it feels like we've been not working on this for a while, but I think it's just because we've been doing the quilting of some of the Quilt As You Go blocks. And I think we did skip a month. We did a lot of embroidery last month, I think. All right, so I folded it up on here, and folding it against the postcard gives us kind of like a little ridge here. And this is our seam allowance right now, so it's kind of crazy, right? We've been cutting giant, weird blobs, but with the knowledge that at this point we're going to get our good seam allowance. So I'm going to get my ruler out. You can just get a normal quilting ruler and measure a 1/4 inch from this line here, but I'm using that special add a 1/4 ruler. It has a little lip on it that's exactly a 1/4 inch wide, and that lip allows me to just bump it up against the edge of the postcard. So I literally can close my eyes, go like this, and know that I got a 1/4 inch seam allowance there. It's so much easier than getting my ruler out and measuring that 1/4 inch. It seems like such a silly gadget. Like, why would I get that one thing for just paper piecing when I can just measure a 1/4 inch? It's because it gets rid of that work of having to do that. It's so nice. It's one of my favorite tools, really. All right, now we're going to cut that extra crazy fabric away, and we are left with one perfect seam allowance there. All right, fold that paper back, and that little step 1 is done at that point. All right, so next up, I want to cut a piece of fabric, the fabric that we're going to sew on for this A5 piece. So the first thing I need to look at is what color is it. I've colored it in this tan, and that represents this for us, so it's not the white, it's the tan. Second off, okay, so I need to cut a piece from here. So I've made an extra copy of the pattern, and I've been using this to help me cut my fabric out. You don't necessarily need this, but I do find it really, really helpful. And the less I have to use my brain, the better. So here we go. So this is just literally a copy of our A5 piece there. So the part that is on the line, so this line right here, it's this edge right there. That line I want on a straight edge when I cut out my fabric. All right, so I'm putting my fabric with the right side down. So this is the back side, the wrong side. And I've just been kind of going along the edge here. But here's a nice, this is like a pretty good straight line. I could put my straight line on there and cut, but you know what? I think I'm going to just continue using the edge of the fabric. So my goal is to have at least a 1/4, or like my piece of fabric has to be as big as the piece plus a generous seam allowance, and I am extra generous with it. So I go, even more than a 1/2 inch. This one that goes up against the straight edge, that one I make a little bit smaller, closer to a 1/4 inch, but all the rest of it, I am doing a big old blob around. I'm just, cutting all crazy, not worried about the seam allowance at all, as long as it's a big. All right, so that's our piece. So I'm gonna actually put it in the same position that my A5 piece is, so we should be looking the same right now. Like, I'm not rotating it differently. I'm in the exact same position. So I'm gonna match up those seam allowances like there, and then I'm gonna put like the right sides together. So there we are. Right sides together along that edge, and now I don't need this guy anymore. So theoretically, what we're going for is I'm going to sew on this line, and then when we fold this back, like when we're done sewing, that piece should still cover our entire A5 piece plus at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. So to test that, because sometimes, I don't know exactly where on this line to go. Like, so if I'm a little high, like I think this might be a little high, but I'll just show you guys what that might be like. We can actually test. So how we test is get a couple of straight pins and pin them along the line. The same line we've been talking about, the one between our current piece and everything that happened before, the one that we folded. We're gonna fake sew. So I did that with the pins, and now we're gonna fake press. So I'm gonna just kind of finger press this up and come back around, and now we can check, is it covering my piece, plus does it have a generous seam allowance? So we can kind of pick the edge up here. And you can see I have a huge seam allowance here and not as big of a one here, but that not big of a one still is a good 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's more than a 1/4 inch, so we're actually probably totally fine where we are. But in reality, I could shift it a bit this way because this seam allowance was extra huge there. But I might just leave it. It works. So There was a little bit better positioning, but it doesn't matter because I cut my blob big enough that it's going to cover my bases a little bit. So I'm going to just do it. Let's sew this. All right, so I can leave the pins in for now, but I'm going to sew along that line now. Okay, so for foundation paper piecing, I want my stitch length to be a little bit smaller, shorter, because then it makes more perforations with the needle along the line, and that's going to make it easier to tear the paper away later. All right, I'm going to take my first pin out, and I'm going to start right on that line, right where it touches this other line here. So I'm not going to cross over into the next shape. I'm just going to go on the line. All right, I'm going to do a little back tack just to kind of lock it in place. Not everyone does it this way. Some people go into the piece a little bit and then just sew, but I think this is still my favorite way. Do a little back tack. All right, I'm going to move that second pin, and I'm just sewing on the line. That's what's so nice about this. I don't even have to think about, you know, am I lined up on my foot just right or anything for a good seam allowance. I just go on the line. And I'm going to stop when I hit another shape. All right, so I'm just going to do my little backward stitching for a sec here, and forward again. All right, and that's that. Let's take it off the machine, and I'm going to snip it, and I'm going to actually snip these ends off right away, and let's get that one too. It gets annoying if all those threads stick around. And let's get the back as well. A little snip and a little snip. All right, back to there. And that step's done. Moving on to the next step. And we got the iron. So we've sewn along the edge here. We've only sewn along the where that line, you know, we've stopped before it hits the next shape. So that's making like this big floppy piece up here, which is fine. We are going to finger press first. We're going to press along our sewn edge, and then we're going to just extend it a little bit, extend it into the part that's not sewn on both sides. And then we can press for real. You always want to press with your fabric up and your like design, your template down, so you don't get like ink and colored pencil and crayon and all that on your iron. But there we go. So that is the whole process. We'll do another one next. I was doing great until you got the check. Then my brain shorted out. I totally lost again about what makes sense. Oh, here, I just want to read the rest of that so I can make sure to help out. Totally lost again about made sense step by step. It's not confused in my head. Okay, we are going to do it. Like I lost where I would need to sew. Okay, we'll go through that again. I don't get why if you cut the piece out as a blob that you then need to check to be sure it's big enough. Okay. Well, I'm just trying to think because we were done with all the shapes that are a little weird. This is a fairly simple foundation paper piecing design. So I'm talking about like why. I'm going to kind of answer the question of why, if I have a big enough blob, why do I need to even bother checking? So in this case, it's a easy enough design because it's just kind of rectangles, and every once in a while we have a triangle. Our brains can kind of estimate those shapes, like where it'll end up easily. However, in a lot of foundation paper piecing, there are some real weird shapes, like really scalene triangles, or just other shapes that, at least for me, my brain cannot do that reverse flip whole thing very easily. So there are some instances where you might be matching up your seam allowances, kind of how we match up our seam allowance here, and it might look like, how the heck is this going to fold to the right position? Like, sometimes it won't be so clear as it is with just our rectangles and our nice simple triangles here. oftentimes it is way weirder and more complex. So I always like just being in the habit of checking. And even with this A5 piece, I'm right on the edge here, like a little bit further up this way, and I probably wouldn't have had enough seam allowance. So that super sucks if you don't have enough seam allowance, because then you have to pick all these. You have to take your piece off and replace it, but you've perforated your paper a whole ton, so it just might rip. So I just like the double checking, and I like the extra big blobs. I know not everyone does it that way, but yes, there are. Oh, Sally says triangles are harder to get in the right place. Yeah, and again, these are just like simple triangles. It's just like a square kind of cut in half, so my brain can kind of get that flip. But sometimes there'll be a triangle that's super duper skinny, so when you flip, it actually like goes upright. It's just like gets confusing. And sometimes it's not always a perfect triangle or anything either. It's some weird shape. So I do like doing that check. It just doesn't hurt, because the offside is that you have to take it apart, and that's a way bigger issue. So I do just like that habit. But yeah, my extra big blobs help me mitigate that as well. I probably do bigger shapes than most people that do foundation paper piecing, but for me, I'm just like, bigger blobs save me a bunch of time and energy. And after a while, I actually don't do the pins anymore. I will just kind of, instead of pinning this, I will just hold it there and kind of fold it, and then just double check real quick like this, and then go back. So that's like my quicker version of doing the pinning. And I can show you how I do that on this next piece, even though this is a rectangle and I know very easily if it's gonna fit or not, but I can kind of show you what I mean. So anyway, let's move on to, I guess we got another one here. We got A6, so this is this itty bitty little sliver down here. So let's move on. We're done with A5. Okay. Let's, I won't go like normal speed, but maybe I won't explain things too much. I'll just kind of, I'll go a little quicker so the steps are more obvious, I guess. Okay. Oh yes, Catherine, you're right. I'm thinking the grandfather clock when you think checking is so important. Yes, so some are, like for example, like here's, I think this is a little bit of a piece of the grandfather clock. So now this has like a bunch of small pieces. We got some odd shapes. This C4 piece isn't quite a perfect triangle. It's like all the sides are different, so that's gonna feel super weird. It just, some other designs, just you need to do that checking just to make sure your brain's kind of seeing it correctly. And just that extra check is just way better than having to pick it all out and tape your piece together. Ugh, nightmare. So anyway, all right. We are now on A6. So step one, I am going to trim those seam allowances, do the postcard technique. So I'm going to cover up everything that happened before. There we are, and we're left with our A6 piece here. Ooh, this is like a itty bitty fold. Ooh. So folding up against the postcard, it reveals the seam allowance that we're going to trim. Let's trim it all. Perfect. Grab my glove. Out of here. Extra blobs. Zoop. Okay. Perfect seam allowance. All right, let's fold this back. All right, now we need to look at the color. Okay, so it's colored in, so we're using this tan again. Let's just keep using the guide. Let's cut our fabric. Again, this is just like a little rectangle. I probably don't need it for the guide, but again, it's a good habit. I think we're just gonna go, so the edge I need nice is this top one. I'm gonna just go right there. So that edge I'm about 1/4 of an inch, and I can clean up this edge if I wanted to, but I think it's good enough. And then the rest I'm going to have that larger blob. Some designers or some people who do this will just cut a perfect 1/4 inch around all of this. But if you do an exact 1/4 inch around your shape, then you have to be super, super, super exact in your placement. And that is hard work. That is not fun. You'll have to keep moving it around until it's just perfect. What a pain. So by just cutting a bigger blob, we just get rid of that problem altogether. Okay, so next up. Oh, you know what, you guys? I did not put the right side down, but luckily this shape, it doesn't really matter. That would have been a problem if we were working with triangles, if I didn't do the right side of the fabric down. All right, so let's match this line with our piece here. I'm actually going to flip it around. This is a cleaner edge. Again, can't do that with anything other than a rectangle. So, all right, I'm going to match my edges and then fold them so the seam allowances are matched, the edge, and now I'm just going to kind of peek where my edges. So this is what I'm doing now instead of using the pins. I'm kind of putting my fingers at the edges of the shape and just kind of seeing, oh yeah, I definitely have enough seam allowance on the edges, so I think we're placed fine there. Let's just do our little fold over. Definitely have plenty of room, so I am placed perfectly fine. So that's my test without the pins, my quick test. I still like doing it. All right, so we're good to sew. So I'm gonna flip that over. All right, sewing. So we're gonna sew along that line that we folded, but I'm gonna stop when I hit another shape. So in this case, I'm gonna start here at this shape and end at this shape. The only time we go over a shape is if we're going into the seam allowance. If we're going into the seam allowance, we can keep going. But if we're within the shape, I'm gonna, oops, this line up here, not that bottom line. But yeah, so I'm gonna start and stop on that edge, or before I get into the other shape. So I can hear it going through all the other fabric. All right. If you go over, like here I'll go over a few times, that's not the end of the world, that's fine. The only thing that happens when you go over the line really is that later when you fold your paper, ooh, broke my thread. When you fold the paper back later, you'll have to like pull out a couple little bits just to get it back at the start. I think I might have messed that up a little bit. Oh well. All right, let's snip our ends. All right, that step's done. Oops, lost my skizzers. Let's finger press this now. All right, and iron. Ooh, our whole shape's coming together. Love it. There we go. So our white piece here is fully carved out, except for, cutting off the top here. So all we have left is to add our two edges, our sides here, which will finish carving this shape. I like calling it carving because I feel like you are carving the blob. You're carving this like raw blob into like a perfectly clean, beautiful shape. So, all right, moving on. That's it. That ironing is the last part of the process. So A6 is done. Moving on to A7. All right. So again, we're going to start off with the cutting board, get our postcard, covering up everything that happened before. Right now, that's really the only line we're dealing with. Let's fold it over. And again, if I sewed over the edge a little bit, just like you'll just have to pull those little perforations of the paper out a little bit. Let's trim that seam allowance. Some people trim the seam allowances all afterwards. I don't know. There's so many different processes for this foundation paper piecing. This is by far my favorite way of doing it. I think it's the most relaxing. You don't have to think nearly as much and get things as perfect as a lot of the other processes. I just really like it. Okay, let's just keep up with the process. I'm gonna cut this A7 piece. So now in this case, so this is what we were talking about last night. So this A7 and the A8 look exactly the same, right? So I can probably cut both of those at once. So I think I'll do that. Does the paper wear down the needle? I would think most definitely, Nora. So when I'm done with this project, I'll probably switch the needle out. Okay. So since these pieces are about the same, I'm going to cut two at the same time, so I'm just folding it in half. If I fold it in half, theoretically, if this was printed fabric, I would have a mirror image of each other, which is fine because these ends are sort of like a mirror image. But that's how I would do like A1 and A3, which are truly mirror shapes. I would fold the fabric in half, and then when I unfolded it, I'd have like both sides correct. In this case, we just got a rectangle, so it doesn't really matter. All right, I need my edge and the generous seam allowance, so I need a little bit more here, and I think I'm going to have to get my rotary cutter to get a nice edge on here. So let's just trim this off, so I have trim the fold, so I have a perfectly clean edge. There we go. So if you don't have a nice perfect edge, you just make one. All right, and actually it's this edge, but again, I have this rectangle's the same. So I'm just gonna kind of finish my blob out here. Not being too precise because it doesn't matter if the blob is big enough. Okay, so we have our A7 piece. Oh, I guess it should have been on that side. We have our A7 piece here, and I have the A8 piece here for later. So I don't need to cut my template piece out for that A8 piece. So let's match those seams, put them together, and I can clearly tell this is a rectangle. So I can clearly tell that this is going to be, you know, over the edge here. So our seam allowance is fine. Let's sew that down. So I'm going to flip that over. And we're ready to sew. Now in this case, I have seam allowance. I have a seam allowance here, and I also have a seam allowance there. When I have a seam allowance, I am going to, like an edge, not necessarily an edge, but or a seam allowance, but like if I'm at the edge of my entire design, then I can sew into that seam allowance bit. So it's not like I'm starting and stopping at the shape. I'm going into the seam allowance here. Still gonna back tack. There, just switching my stitch length. Right down the line, and I'll also go into this seam allowance. Okay, so I'll just snip off the ends. All right, last step is the pressing. Let's finger press this over. Look, we carved out that side. It's looking so nice. Except for this little fuzzle hanging out here. Let's snip him. There. All right, grab the iron. nice having everything within arm's reach. I do like foundation paper piecing in a small area like this. It makes a crazy mess though. Like, look at all my crap everywhere. So it is highly messy, but it's just nice and chill too. It gets relaxing when you just go through this process of the postcard, fabric, sew, iron. You know, it's just like this little loop. All right, we're done with A7. Let's move on to A8. So start with the postcard, cover up everything that happened before, fold on that line. Cut out our seam allowance. All right. Zoop. All right, we've already cut our piece here, so I can just match up that edge right away. Put right sides together. Let's just kind of line it up. Again, this is a rectangle. I can visualize that pretty easily, that, you know, the seam allowances are big enough. So I think we're in a totally good position there. And I'm just gonna shift it a little bit. You can pin this if it's a huge floppy piece, pin it. But with these small Splendid Sampler blocks, I don't often pin it because I can just hold it there and flip. All right, to the machine. All right. So I'm all the way to the edge into the seam allowance again here. I'm going kind of fast. That's a little fast for doing foundation paper piecing. I'm getting a little greedy there. All right. Snip and snip. And now we press. All right, let's finger press first. And there we go. This piece is done. We are done with the A section. So ultimately we will be trimming all these edges. So, you know, these outside edges look crazy still, but everything on the inside is totally done. It looks great. You know, here's those triangles carving out this little eye of the needle there. I think it's looking awesome. So that is that. We can move on to the B piece now. I'd like to get this piece done and this whole thing assembled yet. There is a little bit of a trick to assembly, and I want to make sure that we talk about that tonight. So I'm going to try and cruise through this next piece. There's only 3 pieces, so that's going to be helpful. All right, so different than what we've done so far tonight, we have a 1 piece. So in this case, B1. Over here we had a 1 piece, it was A1. The 1 pieces we treat a little bit differently than the rest of this process that we've been doing tonight. So first of all, let's look at the, and I'll get to the difference in a sec, but first off, let's find, I colored it in, so in this case it means it is the tan fabric. And I am, just because triangles get a little goofy in my head, I am going to cut out my template, my guide, basically, my copy. And I'm cutting this crazy. It doesn't need to be cut perfect at all. It's just more of a visual helper when it's on the fabric. So, all right, I'm going to position it the same way. All right, so, well, I don't need to know the straight edges for this. All I need is to cut my blob. So let's try and fill in some of these areas that, let's go right here. So I need that generous 1/4 inch seam allowance around all of it. I'm not worried about a straight edge on this first one. I just want the blob, the 1/2 inch or so blob. So I'm going to cut around. I mean, look at, I got like crazy jagged edges and everything. That's totally fine. And actually, we're done with this fabric now too. Yay! All right, so done with that template piece. Oh, just a reminder, when you do this, the right side of the fabric is down, the wrong side of the fabric is up. Just keep remembering that. All right, so we're going to place, this is the different part. This is how this is different than what we've been doing tonight, the one pieces. We've cut out our blob, and we're going to place the blob underneath our shape right here. And just making sure that I have my generous seam allowance all the way around. And we're going to actually glue that in place. So I have my, kind of like my water-soluble glue. This only needs to be here temporarily. So again, the right side of the fabric is down. So we're going to glue on the back side. I'm just going to kind of put some blobs. This is kind of a really big piece here. So I'm going to just put a few blobs. Let's just make sure this sticks. And I'm going to put one at the bottom too. I'm just gluing like within the shape. Okay, and that's it. We are glued on. That's all there is to the one pieces, like the B1 piece. So we're done. There's nothing else to do with that piece. That's it. We're done. We're moving on to B2, which is over here. And from here on out, it's going to be exactly how we did all the pieces that we did tonight over here. It's really just that B1 piece that's different. So we've done that. So now moving on to B2, we start with our postcard again. So I'm going to cover up everything that happened before, which in this case is B1. We'll flip that B2. So this is a good example of a really weird shape. So this would be one that I would probably want to check, but we'll see that. So let's flip this over and cut our nice seam allowance. There we go. Perfect seam allowance. We can fold this back. You do want to be a little bit careful, like throwing this around at this point because it is only being held on with glue. So I think I'll just actually just set this aside on the thing. Why don't I get my guide? B2. So in this case, I got like a mirror image. I could do both of these cuts at once, but I'm going to do them separately just so we can go through the normal process so you can see the whole process again. Sometimes it adds a level of confusion. Like another thing I have to remember if I do those mirror image things, I gotta remember all that. So we're just gonna go through the process. All right, so B2, this is the edge that needs to be that nice straight edge. The rest can be a blob, but the edge that connects to our folded line that we just did, that's our edge. Okay, it is white. I checked that already. Okay, let's just choose an edge that already exists here. Probably could iron this, but we'll be fine. All right, so again, it's this edge. Okay, right side of the fabric, in this case I'm just using white, but if you have a pattern fabric, right side of the fabric goes down. This is going to be important for a shape like this, because this is not an equilateral type shape. So it's going to be a little goofy. So here's that line again. That's that straight line that's going to match up. I'm going to put that on my edge. So there's about that 1/4 inch seam allowance there. And then the rest I need big enough for the blob. There. It's a jaggedy blob, but it's the blob nonetheless. We definitely have enough seam allowance. Oh, let's get this up here too. There, good enough. Okay, it's a crazy big piece, but that's okay. I prefer that versus our tiny little bits. Okay, so here's our B2, B2. We're gonna match up those lines, and I can remove that, and let's fold those lines together. So see, now this one is harder to tell, right? So the seam is matched up correctly, but it's going up this way goofy, and this comes out here. It's just a goofy shape that it's harder for my brain to predict where it's going to land when I fold it. So if I do fold along the line, or along where the seam allowance might be, I can see that it does end up folding correctly, but from this angle, it's a little bit confusing. Like, if I didn't have such a big blob, if I went like a little too high here, like if I matched up this edge or something, then there, see? So this looks totally logical, right? I match up my edge, and I'm kind of matching up the bottom so it fits with you know, something that I got there already. So this looks like a logical placement. But when I fold it, look at that. All of this edge is missing. The seam allowance did not get all the way out there, even though when it was open like this, it looked like a logical placement. That's why you want the extra blob and why you want to test. So I just did the little flip test without the pins, but you can put the pins in. Yeah, I got a huge seam allowance here a huge area here that I'm missing that needs to be there. So I know for sure I need to shift downward. More so than it looks like my first guess would have been. And now when I flip it, there, now all my edges are covered. Yep. So I'm really happy that I tested that piece. So right here, we're positioned pretty decently. But that's why you test. Okay, so whatever side you're going to sew on, you need to keep the edge at 1/4 inch. Yep, the sewing edge I keep at 1/4 inch. Exactly, that's a good way of thinking about it. So whatever side you are going to sew on, that's the edge you need to keep 1/4 inch. Yep, that's the 1/4 inch. The rest can be the blob. It can be a little bit bigger, but you don't, like, you can just estimate. Technically, the 1/4 inch will be good because that's what you'll end up sewing. So I would just shoot for 1/4 inch on a nice straight edge there. But yeah, then the rest is the blob because that allows you the area to shift. But I am really happy that I tested this because this original placement like here did seem logical, but it wasn't. It missed a whole area here. So let's shift it down again, and I'm going to do my test again. Yeah, okay, that's better. All right, let's bring that back. All right, let's sew. All right, I'm gonna flip this around. This is a kind of a bigger piece. I maybe should have pinned it on those sewing lines, like fake sewed it with the pins, just because it is kind of a bigger floppy piece, but I'm gonna just try and flip it here without it moving on the edge there. Okay, I think we did it. All right, so we're gonna sew along that line. In this case, again, it goes into the seam allowances on both sides, so I am gonna sew in the seam allowance as well, versus just stopping at the shape, because it's not hitting like an interior line or anything. It's just going right into the seam allowance. Go. Backwards a hair. I don't have a little reverse button. I have to actually turn a dial for the reverse, so going in reverse takes me a few seconds. All right, we sewed. That means the next thing is pressing. All right, let's finger press first. rid of the fuzzle. All right, and then press for real. Looking good. And that piece is done. After you press, you are done with that piece. All right, let's flip it back around. Our last piece is B3. Let's give our postcard, cover up everything that happened before. Fold. So now here I've sewn into the seam allowance for this line, so that's going to be tough to fold. So if you have that happening, just you're just going to tear it away. So you're just going to tear your paper along that edge until you're like folded along your line. And in this case, since this is going to go over the seam allowance, I might actually try and fold this little tiny bit over too. There we go. Add a quarter. Cutting glove. There we are. Perfect seam allowance. Let's move this back. Okay, let's hit our last piece here, our B3 piece to help us cut. Last piece, and then we'll do that assembly. So that assembly has some tricks to it, like I said. So I want to make sure that we get to that. Okie dokie. So again, just paying attention to that line. That's going to be our sewing line, our straight line there. So this is that edge. I just need to remember that. And it's also on the white fabric. So we'll get our white fabric out again. All right. I think let's go with this straight edge. Ooh, so that's too close. I need enough for my blob. So I'm just kind of estimating my 1/4 of an inch seam allowance there, but the rest I'm gonna do my blob. All right, that should do. Right side of the fabric is down. Again, I'm just using that white, so I don't have to really pay attention to that. But yeah, the right side of the version is down. All right. Here's our piece. Let's match up those those edges. Fold the right sides together. Again, this is where we got this weird trapezoid shape that I definitely want to test. So I think maybe about there is my first guess. Let's just fold. Yeah, we're covering all our edges, so I'm good there. So I don't need to shift it at all. With my test. All right, let's sew. All right, flip that around. And I'm going to sew in those seam allowances again here. Are all sewn as far as our pieces go. Last step is our pressing. Finger press first. And pressing here. All right, so that is our B section. So we now have our A sections and B sections done. So that is the big main step of this whole process. So next part I want to go over, and we don't have that much time left, but it is just like one cut, or one sewn seam, so we should be able to get it done. The big deal is, how do we match up our points? That's the big thing, because look, I mean, this extends way out. You know, we can't just sew it. It has to line up perfectly, right? These lines are supposed to go exactly into this needle, so we want to be perfect. So what I'm going to start out doing is trimming the edges. So I think in this case I'm just going to trim the edges that we're sewing together. So I'm going to trim this edge and this edge. I'm going to leave all this extra floof around the outside till we're done, I think. So, trimming edges. I'm going to get my mat here. So when we're trimming an edge, I'm really not concerned with this seam allowance edge that I cut on the paper here. And actually, oftentimes in a pattern, oh, it says is selling live now? Oh, weird. Okay, so Facebook keeps changing, so that's goofy. It says, Facebook alert says Penguin and Fish is selling right now. Oh, weird. Okay. Well, we're just live. But anyway, so oftentimes in a foundation paper piecing pattern, they might not even show you where the seam allowances are. We're always going to assume that we need to add a seam allowance. So I'm going to actually measure a seam allowance from this inner line here. That's our real line. That's going to be the edge of our piece when we're done. So I'm going to ignore this sloppily cut seam allowance here. So I am going to get a normal ruler at this point. I know it's a 1/4 inch, but I don't have that little bump to bump my add a 1/4 ruler on anymore. So I'm going to use a real ruler, and I'm going to measure a 1/4 inch from that straight line, and that's what I'm going to cut. There we go. Trim all that off. Oh, lots of little pieces. There we are. So that's our real, actual, perfect seam allowance, like so. And I'm going to do it with this one as well. So it's this bottom edge. So I can tell that this seam allowance is cut crazy right now in the paper. So again, I don't care about that. I just care about this line and cutting my 1/4 inch from that line. Oh, it always says that on Facebook? So Facebook just assumes that I'm doing some sale when I go live. That's weird. I'm going to have to, I don't know, Facebook just changes all the time. I don't know what they're thinking sometimes. All right, so there we go. That's you can see how different it is from that paper one that I cut, but it's our perfect seam allowance here. Okay, so for the next part, we are going to need some pins, and we're going to need the number of pins. Oh, I'm going to get clips too. I'm going to get pins and clips here. So what we need to do is match up this point here. Here, I'll lift this up so you guys can see. We need to match up this point right here where, our tan piece goes into that bottom line. So this point here to that point right there. And then the same thing on the other side here. That point has to meet up perfectly with that point to get our perfect, perfectly lined up needle here. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take one of my pieces, and I'm going to stick a needle straight down into that point. There we go, straight into that point. And I'm going to check it on this side. This side, it looks not quite on that point, so I'm going to just kind of adjust. It looks like it should be right in that fold, right? Ooh, did I not press it back far enough? Here, I'm going to just stretch it back a little bit. There we go. That looks good. So I'm right in that seam there. Okay, so that's what I want. And then it's got to go, okay, right sides together. Okay, these are the edges that have to match up. So let's fold and right sides together. I need to get this pin going through that point right there. So I'm just going to kind of guess from the front. Like I want to go in that seam. I'm not quite there. I got to go down a little bit farther. A little bit higher if I want to be real perfect. There we go. I'm going right through that point there. So there we go. I got both of those points on my pin here. So I'm going to just kind of put my edge together. But notice how my pin is diagonal like this. That means my points have shifted on a diagonal like that. So I'm going to just move the pin so it's perfectly straight. Then I know those points are going to be super straight that way, and make sure that it's straight this way, like basically straight in all directions, and that your edge that we're going to sew is, matched up. There we go. Now at this point, those 2 points should be just perfectly matched up. And should have opened these earlier. Ooh, there. Did it without dumping them everywhere. So now I'm going to put a clip right at that point just to hold that in place. There we are. So now I can take that pin out because I am clipped, and I want to do that same thing to this other side. We're probably in a good, like if I didn't do it on this side, we're probably pretty good because I lined up the one really well, but it doesn't hurt to do it at both points. Oh, see here again, I'm a little far over. I'm not quite in that gap. That's not bad. Let's go there. And then through this side, that's about right there. Yep, not bad. Just make sure everything's just even. All right, and let's get that clip. There we go. That is the pin method for matching up points. Now all we're going to do is sew along this line here, our line that we've, our nice like outer line here, and that should be our 1/4 inch seam allowance. And luckily we just have 2 sections that we have to put together for this. I think I'm going to go like, I'm going to start, come on, there. I'm going to start like at the seam allowance edge or so. I'm going to just keep on back tacking here. All right. Remove that, and I'm just going to hold it in place with my stiletto. All right, getting to the next one. We'll see how well we did on this, how well we matched up these points. Okay, let's take it off the machine. Okay, now we can open it up and see how we did. Oh yeah, those points look freaking awesome. Those are just perfectly matched up. So I hope once we take the paper out, it'll stay matched up. So awesome. So I think I'll press this. Let's do that first. And you know what? I think I might just stay till we have this like for real done. I know it's getting a little late, but there's a couple steps yet. But they're like the simple, fun, nice steps. I just want to get this nice and flat. There we go. So all we have left to do is trim it and take out the papers. And I'm not really sure what order to do that in. I think I'm going to trim it first to the 6.5 inches, just because I can use this as a guide yet. I think I am going to use this as a guide, and then I'm going to tear out the papers. So let's do that. this side too, where I can actually still see those guides. Get my trusty 6.5-inch ruler out here. So I want these lines, really, if I did this right, they should be at that, like, 6-inch mark. Like, so I should have 1/4 of an inch all the way around if I do this. And not quite there. I think it ended up a little bit smaller, but I'm still pretty good. So I'm going to go right there. We'll try and trim this all nicely. Yeah, I think that looks good about there. Okay. Get this edge. Okay, I'm going to try and, oh, I moved. All right, let's go down in this corner and let's get that all squared up again. Okay. Whoa, a little wiggly there. There's thickness to all this paper and everything, so this is a little awkward, but I think we're fine. I just remembered I did kind of want to keep more of an edge for sewing later, but oh well, we're doing it this way now. I know. Oh yeah, you guys just mentioned that too. Leave an edge for quilting. Well, in this case, it was kind of all these floppy edges anyway, so whatever. If I have to add some white to this, then I have to add some white. But there we go. Last up, let's tear out these papers. I kind of just like start trying to like get it at a diagonal. That sometimes helps, but I don't know. That didn't really work. Oh, it's great if it just kind of falls out of there. So remember, we did a lot of perforations with the sewing machine. We lessened our stitch length, shortened our stitch length, so we'd get more holes. Now that should come into play. There, now if I pull at an angle, they kind of pop out a little bit. You do want to actually kind of be careful and slow here because you don't want to pull out any of your stitches. But these are coming off pretty easily, so that's great. It's not always so easy. We are going to have a third finished block for the week. This was a productive, splendid sampler week. I'm feeling awesome about that. Awesome, awesome. So I think we officially have, I think it was 34 blocks once we finished the last one. So we might only have 33 blocks left now. We're getting there. Getting there, getting there, getting there. Picking out this stuff that's under the seam allowance here. Side one off first. And if any little papers stay in there, I mean, they'll wash away over time, I'm sure. I'd like to think. There, and this is also when we get to reveal all our perfect seam allowances that we cut along the way. So we cut all those crazy blobs, but we still end up with perfect seam allowances. I freaking love that with foundation paper piecing. So here we are, our finished block, our finished get to the point block. I think our like points there where we use that pin method of putting them together, dang, they look good. That's not always the easiest thing to do, matching up all those points when you sew the sections together. So definitely use that pin method. It worked out great for this block. Awesome, you guys. We are done. Okay, so that is the foundation paper piecing process. It's a lot of peas. But yeah, so I definitely am happy that we got to that pin method. That is the trick to sew your sections together once they're done. And we even got to do a one piece again, the B1 piece, so that's great. There we are. So awesome. Thank you so much for working on the Splendid Sampler 2 again with me tonight. Just a reminder that tomorrow is the last day for our big kit sale, our holiday Crafting for the Holidays bundle. After tomorrow, or on Monday, we'll be having all the pieces individually, but right now, if you get all of them as a bundle, it's 55% off, plus you get some extra bonuses as well. So time to do that is before the end of the day tomorrow, if you want that big discount. So thank you guys again, and I appreciate you being here, and I'll be back on Monday. Have a great evening and weekend. Good night.